Hi, I'm Bill DeYoung. This is the Catalyst Sessions for Wednesday. Pleasure to introduce you to my friend John Capouya, who teaches journalism and nonfiction writing at the University of Tampa. He is also the author of several books, the most recent of which, from University Press of Florida, is called Florida Soul, From Ray Charles to Casey and the Sunshine Band. It is a fascinating look at the history of R&B, of Black music in the state of Florida, and the many contributions it has made to our cultural fabric. Hi, John.
Hey, how you doing?
I've been better, but I've been worse. So, God
Yeah.
willing, we'll get through to the next day.
Good.
You were telling me that so have you been teaching over the summer virtually, or are you about to come back, or how's that working?
I haven't been. I don't usually teach over the summer, so when classes begin, which is actually only like 3 weeks from now, uh, I'm going to teach my courses remotely. Some are going to be in person at the University of Tampa,
Yeah,
and some are going to be kind of a hybrid where half the class goes for a period to allow for distancing while half is participating remotely, and then they switch halves. And so anyway, but I'm staying out of it.
yeah, okay, well, probably a good idea. Florida Soul, is it 2018? Did it come out? 2017? I mean, I familiar with it. We met a few years ago. So,
I think. Yeah.
where are you from? You from Newark?
Yeah, from New York and New Jersey. Yeah.
Okay. Well, before I get into Florida Soul, let's just sort of set the scene a little bit. When did you come down here, and why? You're a New York guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I thought I would move to Florida. My wife didn't either, but these professorships are very hard to come by,
Mm,
especially ones that lead to tenure. So after that happens, then you have a job for life. Basically, there's security there that I don't see in a lot of other professions right now.
sure.
So that was the decision. So we moved down here actually in 2008. So it's been some time ago. For a lot of that time, though, we kept an apartment in New York and we were going back and forth. And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Well, your background is as a journalist, as I remember. I mean, you wrote for magazines and papers for years and years. Where are you from originally? Was it Newark? Am I right?
Well, I was born in New York City and I lived there for a while. And then I lived in New Jersey for a lot of my youth.
Yeah.
And then I moved back there to go to graduate school at Columbia in journalism.
Yeah.
And I lived there for like 25 years before I took this job.
Well, there's a dedication in your book to some DJ in Newark, in New Jersey, saying
Right.
this the Rhythm Revival. Shout out to Billy C. Wirtz, who has a show called that on WMNF. And I wondered if that was where your love of soul music, of R&B music, came from being a kid listening to the radio.
It was actually earlier than this show is called the Rhythm Review on WBGO in Newark. It's a public radio
Okay, Rhythm Review. Okay, yeah.
and you can listen to it online, which I do all the time at WBGO.org. It's a great jazz station, blues, soul, Latin.
Yeah.
But before that, actually, when I was living in Princeton and growing up, and I was quite young, uh, I had a friend at whose house I was over at his house a lot, and whose mother was a nice Jewish lady, unaccountably was a soul music fanatic, and she actually introduced me to James Brown and also to B.B. King and blues, and she took us to see some of these people live in Trenton, which is the capital of New Jersey. It's close, and it's also like it was a very black city. I learned from her to this music. And there was also a radio station, AM, called WTNJ, also out of Newark. And I think that's where I first got my exposure to and my love of this music. Yeah. So I grew up on it.
You saw James Brown live back in the day. What was that like?
I was very lucky, and I saw a bunch of people in and around Trenton that, I was very lucky to see.
Because I can remember around the time, I'm 61. I remember about the time the Tammy thing came out, and I think that was I was a little kid. Look at this guy, and of course he used to come through here and play the National Guard Armory and those kind of places, and I was a kid, but it just looked so cool. I mean, honestly, I'm a little white kid from Florida, and it was kind of alien to me. But I remember thinking, that's energy. I mean, that's what I remember most about it, was that kind of energy. I can't even imagine being in the hall, being in the room with that energy. You know, I picture it like sort of a low ceiling and sweat dripping off the ceiling. But okay, so this was imbued in you. When you moved to Florida to take this gig, so what happened? I mean, I'm interested in the germ of this book, where it came from. When you start to hear all these stories, man, there's a lot of cool stuff in Florida. How did it start?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, when you're listening to the radio up north or playing records, they don't say, oh, and that was The Cleanup Woman by Betty Wright, and she's from Miami.
Yeah.
You know, they say that was Betty Wright, and right. So I'm kind of embarrassed to admit it, but I didn't even know Ray Charles was from Florida when I came down here. Maybe because he sang that song, Georgia on My Mind, with so much. I thought, you know, maybe he was from Georgia. So I just came to hear gradually, serially, that all these people whose music I grew up loving had Florida roots. Sam and Dave, I have no idea. I love their music. So at a certain point, there was another sort of a mini catalyst, if you will. I started hearing this urban legend in Tampa that the song and the dance, the twist, originated there.
Hank Ballard's song, yeah.
And I always associate it with Chubby Checker in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And there was the 50th anniversary of the twist came about, and I proposed to the Tampa Bay Times that I write a feature and dig into this urban legend and see if it was true.
Yeah.
And pretty much is. You know, it turns out it was written by a guy named Hank Ballard.
Yeah.
And he said at various times, and other people confirmed, that he saw these young girls on Central Avenue here, which was the heart of the Black entertainment and business district in Tampa. They were doing this little shimmying dance, and he asked them what it is, and they said, we call it the twist. And he wrote the song, and he went immediately to Miami and recorded it for this producer named Henry Stone, who has his fingerprints all over Florida soul.
Yes.
But then it turned out he really wasn't allowed to record it for Henry Stone because he was still under contract for King Records in Cincinnati. So Henry Stone didn't release it. But in any case, Dick Clark of American Bandstand heard the song by Hank Ballard and the Midnighters, which did pretty well on the R&B charts after he recorded it legally for King Records.
So they recut it, yeah.
And then he basically created Chubby Checker to cover the song, basically word for word and note for note. And then Dick Clark was able to put Chubby Checker on American Bandstand and expose the song to the whole country. So anyway, I concluded that the urban legend was true.
Yeah.
And then at that point, I had a lot to add up. You know, Sam and Dave, Ray Charles, the twist. I found out Betty Wright was from Florida. So I was having a conversation about something else with an editor at the University Press of Florida, and I mentioned this, and she said, well, do you think there could be a book in this? And I had thought of it, actually, but I pretended that I hadn't, because editors like it, as you know.
It's their idea.
They like their idea better.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, what a great idea. So anyway, they commissioned the book, and I wrote it. You know.
Well, obviously, some of the things were no-brainers. I mean, Ray Charles, once you realize his connection to not only being born here, but to Florida, of course I'm going to do that. But you found many others that you did, that Sleuthing produced. Let's talk about Ray Charles, though, for a minute. Talk to us about his history in Florida. And, you know, we all know about the St. Pete, Florida blues, which was cut here. But he was here in his teenage, early 20s a lot, like Tampa, gigging around, Orlando, all over. Tell us about Ray, about Brother Ray.
He actually was born in Georgia, but then before he was 6 months old, his mother moved him to North Florida.
Sorry. Yeah.
Florida is, you know, where he grew up, where he went blind.
Yeah.
He went to the St. Augustine School for the Deaf and Blind, where he learned to read music in Braille, which was incredibly important for him and his career and his work.
Sure, yeah.
And he became a professional. He left that school about 16, decided to become a working musician, and he did early gigs in Jacksonville and Orlando, and then he washed up in Tampa when he wasn't doing very well. And he played here with several bands, including Manzi Harris's orchestra. I think he also played some at the Manhattan Casino in St. Petersburg with that band and maybe some others. And apparently it's here in Tampa that he actually recorded his first song. And I believe it was that song, the St. Pete, Florida Blues, that he wrote.
Yeah.
So originally, apparently it was supposed to be, it was about his girlfriend, and she was from Tampa. But there was a producer, the legend is, that said, well, nobody's heard of Tampa. Call it St. Petersburg. I don't know how.
Okay, nobody's, okay. Huh?
Well, at the time, St. Petersburg, I think, was a vacation destination, but Tampa was. So anyway.
And they made cigars there, you know.
So he left Florida before he was 20, and he never came back in any meaningful way. But he credited Florida in later interviews, and one of them I quote in the book. He talks about in Florida after the war, after World War II, a ton of musicians came back from being in the military, where they were in these military bands. That was their service, and they got a lot of training and a lot of top-rate competition in those military bands. And so he said it was, you know, if you wanted to make it as a musician in jazz or blues or R&B at that time, he said he had to raise the level of his game. And he said, Florida toughened me up. You know, so he credited Florida with help, you know, creating him as a top flight musician. You know.
One of the things I found really fascinating about Florida Soul, about your book, was the way there was such a fertile scene, you know, and I guess it's the Chitlin circuit, but I mean, while, you know, other parts of the world and other races such as mine were sort of going about their lives, there was this other world going on that was, the music was incredible, the dance scene was incredible. Can we talk about, is it Overtown in Miami, the Sam Moore story, which is particularly fascinating. You spent some time with Sam and his wife. One of the reasons I want to talk to you today is because somebody was talking to me the other day. We started talking about the Manhattan Casino, and then it became, well, you know, that when artists were on the road in Florida, they could play the white clubs, but they couldn't stay in the white hotels, couldn't eat in the white restaurants. Tell us about Overtown in Miami. It's Overtown, right? Or is it Overton?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was sort of the equivalent, although much bigger than the Central Avenue district in Tampa, in that it was the African-American Business and Entertainment Center. And it was teeming with clubs, musicians. Musicians could play, as you said, in some of the hotels on Miami Beach, but they couldn't stay there. So they came back and stayed either in hotels or with families and boarding houses and such in Overtown. And often, I'm told by people like Sam Moore of Sam and Dave, after they finished their gig on Miami Beach, if they were lucky enough, because those were better gigs, they would come to different places and jam and play with everybody else and out the competition. And so it was a live, very late night scene in Overtown. Sam Moore, who was born there, he met his partner, Dave Prater, in just an adjacent neighborhood, Liberty City. But anyway, then they became a duo there, and they had their first recordings and their first success there. And from there, because of that success, they went to Stax Records in Memphis, which is what I associated them with. So I got to spend time with Sam Moore and talk about his career, but also his craft. You know, he feels like when he was with Sam and Dave, they were young and they were just strong singers and they belted it out. And now he's not as strong, and he's in his 80s, and he has to learn more craft and different ways of singing than he did in the past. So,
Of course.
I had a really good session with him.
Can I ask you about the Manhattan Casino? I know this is something you spent some time with Frankie Gearing. So let's tell the folks who Frankie is and about the significance of the Manhattan Casino to St. Petersburg.
Well,
and to the state and to the scene, but yeah.
Well, I guess, again, the equivalent of the Black Entertainment and Arts District was the Deuces around 22nd Street South, I believe it is.
Yeah.
I was St. Petersburg Avenues.
You're in Tampa. You're forgiven. Yeah.
So there's a woman there who was a very accomplished singer who still lives there, lived there most of her life, named Frankie Gearing.
Yeah.
And she told me when I did a chapter on her that she used to try to sneak into the casino when people there, I think she mentioned Little Richard would play there and other people who she wanted to see. But she rarely managed to get by the security guard. She said it was usually an off-duty cop who knew me and my family, and he would be like, come on, Frankie. So, but she said you could just sit or stand across the street, and they'd have the windows open. There was no air conditioning, and you could hear the music. And then later in her career, when she became more established and successful, she came back and she played the casino. So she was the lead singer in a series of girl groups, as they used to call them. And, after the success of the Supremes at Motown, people automatically thought, well, we need a trio of women. Let's get some girls together, So she played and was the lead singer in a succession of them.
Yeah.
And probably the most successful part of her career was she was in a band called Quiet Elegance, which is kind of a strange name, but again, it was a trio. Mm-hmm. Martha Reeves' sister was another one of them, and they recorded for High Records in Memphis, which is Al Green's label, and they sang some backup, toured with Al Green, and they were managed by one of the Temptations. So they were pretty successful, and they played all the Apollo in New York and the Howard in Washington, and so anyway, now she's back, and she actually came and sang at the launch party for my book. There was a band called Little Jake Mitchell and the Soul Searchers, and they played the gig at the Palladium Theater.
Palladium, sure. Now, part of when you mentioned Little Jake, who I've spoken with, and some of those stories about the early, like Lavelle Kama and Linda Lindell,
Mm-hmm.
kind of native Floridians who just worked that circuit tirelessly. Those are among the most fascinating in the book. And I think that it speaks to kind of what we were talking about when you were up north. It's like, wait, Florida has soul music? I mean, there was a happening, thriving scene down here. What do you hope people take away from the book?
Well, I think, primarily the thesis is people think about Motown when they think about R&B in this country. They think about Memphis because of Stax Records and High Records. New Orleans, obviously, great R&B city. And people don't think about Florida. And I make the case that it deserves to be a capital on that soul music map, which is the capital of the world, not just the United States, because we invented soul music and it's our thing. So that is the overall sort of overarching idea, the thrust of the book. But then the most fun part of it for me, and perhaps for the readers, is actually reading the individual stories of the people who made that music.
Yeah.
Their careers and their travails, but also I tried to emphasize in the book their craft as well. The musicians and the singers and the producers. I think sometimes there's a stereotype that people can come into the studio and just open their mouths, and because they're African American, these soulful sounds come out and they're great. They're not. There's another band that James and Bobby Purify.
Yeah.
Who had the big hit "I'm Your Puppet" and other.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought them up. Yeah.
They talked about rehearsing their harmonies, over and over and getting it right, and obviously the producers do that, and the singers, they studied and they learned and they improved. So one of the great things about it was sitting down with these people whose music I loved, not because I'm starstruck, I don't want their autographs, but because they would explain to me, like, for example, Timmy Thomas, who wrote a great song called Why Can't We Live Together?
Oh, yes, of course.
It's been covered by Santana and Joan Osborne and Stevie Winwood and all kinds of people. It's a song that's really endured. And I sat down with him in the living room, and he had a little plastic keyboard, and he explained to me how he created that song. He said, well, first I got the bass line, that's B flat and C, here it is. And then I added this chord with an augmented ninth, and I'm really fascinated by that. I'm not a musician, but I love the way to understand the craft and also to get the message across that there's a real craft to this music, which sometimes people think, I think is less sophisticated.
It's so good. And as I got older, I came to appreciate it more and more. Lattimore, my God, Lattimore still lives in Hillsborough County. There's a great guy. I mean, that voice. You spent some time with him.
Yeah, I think he's 80, but he still tours, he travels. He has played the Palladium several times. So if you see him there, and we are back to seeing live music, you got to check him out. He does blues cruises, and he's in Europe a fair amount, where he's appreciated a lot.
Yeah.
And he's still performing, and he still sounds great. He recorded a lot for this same guy, Henry Stone, in Miami. And his big song is "Let's Straighten It Out," which people might recognize. Still hear it, still gets airplay.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Henry Stone, because I wanted to go there because of TK and the 70s stuff that he did. But I mean, this guy was a pivotal figure, and I think, if I may, that it's very much like our friend Phil Gernhardt. In other words, he was a great facilitator. In other words, the talent, could process through him. As you said, a good producer is really important. Talk to me about Henry Stone, going all the way, because I know he was there. Like we go through Betty Wright and all these people, but going even before that. Tell us who he was and why he's significant.
Yeah, he was a trumpet player from New York, and he actually performed in a military band, as I described, during the war.
Yeah.
Then he realized he moved to California after he got out of the service, but he realized, like, he wasn't that good enough. He wasn't going to be a musician. So he decided to A, move to Florida. He moved to Miami, and B, be a distributor of records for other record companies.
Yeah.
He continued to do that throughout his career, even though when he was creating his own music in his own studio, TK Records. And he had a great ear for talent and for songs. And he at one point had a whole studio full of basically stellar singers and musicians who were their house band. Timmy Thomas on keyboards, Betty Wright sang her own songs and backup vocals, along with Gwen McCrae, who had hits for and Lattimore and Timmy Thomas on keyboards, a guy who went by Little Beaver on guitar.
Yeah, I remember reading that. Yeah, Little Beaver.
They would all back up each other's songs and records when they were the lead person. And, there's a dynamic in which Black artists feel they were ripped off by white producers and record label owners, which obviously in many cases was very true.
Historically, very true, of course. Yeah.
So, he had a little bit of a reputation in some quarters that he made all the money. Other people like Lattimore and Timmy Thomas swear by him. He was a very, very important figure. And of course, it was his clerk, Harry Wayne Casey, with a partner, Rick Finch. Both were clerks at Henry Stone's warehouse in Hialeah, and became KC and the Sunshine Band.
Right.
They were another phenomenally successful, also multi-ethnic and multiracial group.
It was originally called the Sunshine Junkanoo Band, wasn't it?
Right. They were originally called the Junkanoo Band after a Bahamian music that they heard in Miami that they really liked, which is comes out of a festival apparently that happens in the Bahamas every year, the Junkanoo, which is a parade. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of horns, a lot of whistles, a lot of percussion, and they originally tried to replicate that music. And then they later changed the name and their music moved a little bit too. But so interviewed him. So anyway, Henry, as one example of his sort of mogul persona,
Yeah.
I interviewed him in person down in Miami a couple of times. And at one point I was talking to him again about something. He was very helpful. He put me in touch with people and said, tell him Henry said you should talk to John.
Oh yeah, that's always great. Yeah.
So he said, so the book is basically Florida soul music history, right? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, I am the history of soul music in Florida. And I said, well, and then he continued. So what I'm saying is I should get a cut.
Oh, how Gernhardian of him.
Yeah. I said, well, Henry, you could have a cut of my losses.
Like you made a ton of money on the book, right?
Yeah. I don't know if you understand the book business. You're from the record business. There's nothing to cut up, So he stood down, but that was his instinct is,
so
what's my percent?
When Casey and the Sunshine Band became such a big deal during disco, does that mean the money for Henry was rolling in?
Yes.
Yeah. What was the record store? What's that? I can't remember. It looks like it's called Johnny's Records because, hey, it's right here on the cover of the book.
Yeah.
Remind me, it's been a while since I read it.
Here, I'll show
What
you.
was the label in the back of the record store in Miami? Do you remember? Somebody was running a label right in the back of Johnny's Records.
Yeah, there.
Oh, okay. Yes, you do remember.
Yeah. So
Snuck one over on me.
this is, from what everybody tells me, this is the first Black-owned record company in Florida. It was like right around 1960, and it was founded by two alumni of the FAMU Marching 100, which I also found to be sort of a consistent thread through the book.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people trace their musical training and also networking with people they later recorded with to that program. And they, they have a great jazz program aside from people who march.
Yeah, right.
Like Cannonball Adderley is a product of that jazz.
Right, of course.
So Willie Clark and Johnny Pearsall, Johnny's Records, they started this record store in Liberty City.
Yeah.
And then they started a label called Deep City Records. And actually they discovered Betty Wright and recorded her before she went over to Henry Stone. And Willie Clark went with her and did a lot of work with Henry Stone and Betty Wright and a lot of other people there. He was a very prolific producer. So I interviewed him. Johnny Pearsall is deceased. And there's a documentary about Deep City Records and the birth of the Miami Sound that I really recommend if anybody can find it. And their first singing star was actually not Betty Wright, but Helene Smith. She was, I think, in maybe 10th grade when she began singing for this record. She later married Johnny Pearsall. And so I interviewed her, and they incorporated from the FAMU experience, a lot of horns.
Yeah.
And an arranger who did that for them, and they found a lot of local talent, and there was a ton of it. And they really laid the groundwork for what later became the TK and the Miami rhythm and blues sound.
Didn't Johnny or whoever it was kind of discover Betty singing in the store or something? Isn't that a famous story?
Yeah, I mean, the story they tell, and I don't have any reason to doubt it, is she won a contest, on the radio, and the prize is you get this new album by somebody. So she came to the store, and I believe she was like 12 at this point, maybe 14. And so Johnny and Willie are in the back doing their business. And when she came in to pick up her free record, the song Summertime was playing on the, they had music playing all the time in her store, and she started singing along. And so Johnny and Willie in the back, they hear this voice, and they run out there, and they're like, who's singing? They're like, so it's that girl. So they immediately, start asking her who she is and whatever. So then they have to go to her parents because she's a minor.
Yeah.
And they recorded her, I think when she was 15, maybe. And her big song, "The Cleanup Woman," I think she was 18. So she had a lot of early success.
And we just lost Betty recently, I remember.
Yeah, she passed. And then in the interconnectedness, which I also found between Florida soul people, it turns out she grew up across the street from Sam Moore, and she knew him. She called him Uncle Bubba, and she would say, "I want to sing like Uncle Bubba," because he was older. And then, anyway, there's all kinds of interconnections when you start to know the people, and that was fun too, tracing it.
Ladies and gentlemen, the book is Florida Soul. I think that looks good. From Ray Charles LaCasey and the Sunshine Band. It's published by University Press of Florida. I know you can get it on Amazon and all fine booksellers, the ones that are open, as it were. John Capouya, absolute pleasure to speak with you today.
Same here. Thanks.
And give my best to Suzanne, and we will see you soon.
All right.
Take care, brother. Bye.
All right.